Hey guys, it's your boy, Ballface8020, back again with another great commentary. I did this past day start my new job, so the anxiety is definitely much improved, but it is still there. To basically we spent the whole day just getting me logged onto the computer, so I haven't actually started the work yet. So hopefully I'll feel better still after the week is over. One bad thing about this job is I actually have to work. So like, yeah, I'm only there 4 hours a day, but the whole time there, like, I can't be on my phone, I can't be reading. I got to actually be making calls the whole time, and then of course, I've got to produce. I think I think will be okay, but we'll see. Worst case scenario, I'll get fired, right? I'm just back where I started. Anyway, so the elections. I think the first thing to say, because you're gonna have tons of people with hot takes. The first thing to say is that the elections went exactly how you'd expect by looking at the fundamentals. You're talking about New Jersey, Virginia, New York City. These are blue areas in an off-year election when the other party is in power. And and then we have to remember that the Trump did not win a landslide in the first place. He won by what, 1%, over 1%. Yeah, electorally he did well, and that is an issue. That is an issue. I don't think when liberals are dismissive of that, they're making a mistake. They're incorrect, I think. But overall, in terms of just sheer mass of voters, the sides are pretty even. And in fact, when you consider the fundamentals that favored Trump over Kamala and how he's so much of a better politician than she is, honestly, the fundamentals in terms of raw voters is still with the left, which I've talked about in previous videos. So, I think that, especially, I've talked about this, right? Like, I still read some left, not as much as I used to, but I still read some left-wing stuff. And they, you read them and they still think they're winning. They still think they're winning. But the truth is, you read the right-wing stuff, and I've talked about this before too, they think that they've already won. They're acting like Democrats acted during the Obama years. Like that it's over the party, and they're already thinking about, are the Democrats just going to split? What's going to happen to them? Are they going to have to like become a Republican light party? You also saw, you guys wouldn't remember this, but a little bit of like this in the aftermath of 9/11. But we see tonight, evidence that the Democrats are very alive and very kicking. They have real problems. they have real problems, and this win is probably going to be used to cover that up. I remember, again, from the reverse, when during the Obama years, the Republicans would have these massive victories in off-year elections, and people would say, both on the left and the reformers on the right, who wanted to make who wanted to make the Republicans pro-immigration, would say stuff like, yeah, okay, these are nice wins for the Republicans, but fundamentally, there's a lot of real problems here for the Republicans, before Trump came in, because nobody saw Trump coming and fixing everything. But, and I think it's the same thing here. So, I congratulate the Democrats on tonight's performance. They did a really good job. But again, in terms of fundamentals, it's exactly what we would expect. So, it's going to be a shock to somebody who thought that the Democrats were going extinct, but that was never my position. I advised against it. I think the bigger issue has to be that the polls showed the Republicans had a chance in all these places. Well, not really the Republicans in New York, but Cuomo had a chance in New York. And the Republicans had a chance in all these places, and that and then they would lose so decisively. And not only would they lose decisively, but the lieutenant governor thing in Virginia, that guy, the guy had like made some released some text talking about how he wanted to like kill the kids of his opponents, and he wasn't even like joking. This guy Jay Jones, I mean, the dude's just a psycho, and people were saying that, oh, that's going to be and I didn't really say anything about it one way or the other, but I was like, I don't know, I don't know, like, like you might have some people on the right who care about stuff like that, but nobody on the left does. And like, I mean, like I wouldn't, but I think like a leftist anyway. And yeah, so like he won, and I mean, they all won, and they won bigger than the polls seem to indicate. They won big. So, and when I talked about fundamentals, again, blue area is an off-year election, but when you talk, especially if you're on the right, reading right-wing Twitter, you read a lot about Trump's victories, but like, what are Trump's victories? Deportations, ceasefire in the Middle East, stopping Iran's nuclear program, and trade deals. Yeah. Okay, those are real accomplishments. Guess what? No voters care about them. People on Twitter care about that stuff, but voters only care about cost of living. And I mean, and this is a problem. This is a real problem in democracy, because the most important issue is immigration, but very few people vote on immigration one way or the other. Which makes no sense, because Ann Coulter said it's the issue that decides every other issue. But what are you supposed to do, right, when the public doesn't recognize it? And me, I've got a lot of interest in in World War II in general, and in the Nazis, and that doesn't mean that I'm a Nazi. It doesn't mean that I'm a Nazi or endorse Nazism, but I do think the stuff the Nazis did politically is interesting. And, so like Hitler's main issue was the Jews. His second main issue was rearmament. And when he was talking to his own people, his own audiences, like Nazi stalwarts, he really emphasized those, because those were the big issues to him. But when he went to the general German electorate, like, it was there, but he didn't campaign on it, because he understood that that's not the kind of stuff the public votes on. What he talked about was public order, which was an issue in Germany. I mean, it's not an issue in America today. Public order and, jobs, opportunity, and stuff. And then Hitler would finally come to power when the economic situation in Weimar Germany got really bad. And that's like, like this Mamdani guy, you can go back and look at his stuff. His main issue is the Israel-Palestine stuff. I mean, he's been open about this. That's his focus. But he, mayor election in New York, well, you can't focus on that shit. So instead, he ran a campaign connecting with voters and talking about it. And that's, how democracy is. And, again, my view, which one of the main problems with democracy is you have to talk to voters who don't get it. And so he goes and actually addressed the concerns of New Yorkers, desire for change, renting and stuff, renters, and general cost of living. So, and people really are struggling with cost of living. So there's really nothing they can do. So the only thing they can do is vote for somebody who's going to at least try something different. I believe Mamdani, I mean, In terms of crime and safety, I think Mamdani will not be any worse than it already is there. So like when people saying like New York is just going to completely collapse, like that would be nice, but I don't know. I think Mamdani understands the importance of public safety. Um but like the other, like, like socialism seizing the means of production, like that's not really something you can try on a local or state level. That can only be done on a national level. Um, so I don't know what his. I mean, honestly, I don't. I just don't know how he's going to play it. Because there. It seems like there's two ways it could possibly go. One is he could actually try to implement some of his socialist stuff. What I do think he'll do is the rent freeze, which means that in the short term, poor New Yorkers are going to get some rent relief. Not even rent relief, but their rates are going to stop going up. So, and I think that's going to be really popular. Again, this is a problem, with giving voters. You can give them things that these sugar high things that then come back to haunt you. We're seeing this now also really big with the Obamacare subsidies. So he'll do that. I don't know if he's going to try to implement the other stuff, but the thing is, he's a good politician. So as long as he can continue to be out there connecting to people, he'll have his base who are going to be with him no matter what. He does the rent freeze. I mean, things might work out okay. If he actually tries to like implement some of the shit he campaigned on, like socializing growth. Like, first of all, I don't think he'll be able to. I don't think that, I think the state and the courts will step in. But and that might even be what he wants. Like, he tries to do it and then the state shuts it down and he can be like, hey, I can't do this, and then he doesn't get blamed for the bad stuff, or like he can blame. I'm not so sure that he's not going to be a success. We'll see. We'll see. But anyway, the thing is, so for the midterms, the polls seem to be okay for the Republicans right now. But again, you just saw the polls really overestimate the Republicans in this last night or yesterday, and then the polls are really overestimated the Republicans in the midterms in 22. So, and the truth is, I don't care about the midterms. The only thing I care about in the midterms is that the Republicans keep 50 in the Senate. And, and ideally more than that, because you've got Murkowski and Rand Paul, who are unreliable and stuff. But actually you would need 51. So that's important, because if it doesn't happen, it's gonna be a disaster. You're gonna end up in some shutdown. We may have a shutdown, and that's gonna be another thing. It's like right now, this shutdown can end by ending the filibuster. But I mean, if worse comes to worse, but assuming the Democrats take the House, and they probably will, then you're going to end up in some like total crisis, because you're going to have an unresolvable shutdown. Still, it's important that the Republicans, keep 51 in the Senate so they can get their judges through. But so the issue is, and this is going to be what every party in the Western world is going to have to deal with for quite some time, is this cost of living shit. And, if you can't address it, yeah, people are going to be open to guys like Mamdani. And I had said, a long time ago, said, yeah, I'm going to vote for Trump because I need to keep him out of jail. and because fuck liberals, and because I owe them. But I didn't, like, my heart wasn't in it. I didn't want him to win because I felt like the problems of America were unsolvable. And particularly, I was also concerned about Ukraine and Taiwan. I was like, there's no way to stop China from taking over Taiwan. There's no way to stop um, Russia from taking over Ukraine. And obviously, I was wrong about that. But the thing is, the United States, I mean, Ukraine can only continue to fight as long as it has unlimited money from the U.S. backing it up, the U.S. and Western Europe backing it up. And the, I eventually that's not going to be there. I don't know how long it's gonna last, but the U.S. continues to run unsustainable fiscal deficits, and that always is going to lead to inflation. So the cost of living still sucks. The only way to bring the cost of living down would be to raise interest rates, and Trump has been demanding that rates get cut. They've already started to cut, and to reduce, ideally end deficit spending. If you look at countries that have solved hyperinflation or even just large-scale inflation, it's always the same thing: interest rate increases and budget cuts. Okay, and but the governments don't like to do that because it's politically unpopular. You end up cutting out politically popular programs, and you and it increases unemployment. Look what's happened in Argentina, and it worked out so far for Milei in Argentina, but you have seen, an increase in poverty and an increase in unemployment there. Because that's just how it goes. If you want to stop inflation, there's no other way to do it. Again, problems with democracy, and yes, it worked with Milei, but maybe that's the answer. Maybe the answer is to just be honest with voters, and in Milei's case, it was different because inflation was so bad, and it had gone on for so long that people were finally like, okay, whatever. We'll just, we will take the higher unemployment and the increased poverty, as long as we can have some relief on the inflation. But we're not there yet in the U.S. or in any Western country. But the thing is, I don't see the cost of living issue as solvable, because I may make a specific video about how gold is money, which, I know is kind of an annoying thing to say because it's associated with obnoxious gold bugs who've been predicting the death of the dollar for, at least since 1971 at this point. So what do we have, 50 plus years? But it's true. Look at the history of money, and, what we think of as money today is ultimately based on gold. And really, your money only has value insofar as it can be exchanged for gold. J.P. Morgan once said, "Gold is money, everything else is credit." It's true. It's literally true. And the reason that's so important is look at the price of gold over this last year. It's like it's doubled. Well, the cost of goods and services haven't doubled. So that means there's a lot of inflation waiting to happen. The dollar is, even now, the only way the gold could double in price in a year is if the dollar had been seriously overvalued against gold in the first place. And that's true, but it's still extremely overvalued. A dollar, I know inflation is bad, but if you actually look at the amount of total credit in the economy, a dollar should be like what you get with a dollar should be like you shouldn't get $1's worth of goods and services for $1. You should get maybe 10 cents worth. That's what the dollar should truly be worth, something around there. And then these things can kind of cascade, and eventually people lose faith in the currency altogether. At which point you have to reset. Again, that may be for a different video. But this is a real problem, and neither party talks about it. I don't think either party really understands it, and neither party certainly has any idea about how to address it. They go with, like on the left, they say like, oh, we need to raise taxes on billionaires and increase services, or like, they rent freezes and stuff, price controls. But you do that shit, then you get shortages. So like, that doesn't work. And then the Republicans just know like Reaganism, free market stuff. Oh, we'll cut taxes and regulations. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't do any good if, the government is still running, a deficit of 5% GDP every year, and credit continues to get created like at a very rapid pace. You're still increasing the money supply. I've talked about this before. The real money supply is kind of a misnomer. What matters is credit supply. And and what I mean by that is, just to give you like a thought experiment example, is any money that's loaned that's how money gets created in our system. Like you think that when you use a credit card to buy something, you use your credit card to buy an $80 pair of sneakers, okay? What people think, this is what I used to think, is that, okay, so the credit card company has $80 that they are going to give to the merchant. And then they are going to ask me, they're going to send me a bill saying, you owe us $80 or whatever. And then, so then when I get that $80 in my bank account, now I have the physical $80 and I'm going to give it to them. So that money just got moved around. But that's not what happened. That objectively isn't what happened. What happens is when you do the credit card, you have loaned $80 into existence. That's $80 that did not exist before that now exists. It now exists as a loan on the credit card company's balance sheet. So basically what you did was you made a loan on behalf of the credit card company. And that's an additional $80. And then, so, I mean, I know that, it's more complicated than that, but that's like the first step that you need to understand. So, when you have people loaning more money into existence or more credit into existence, you're going to get inflation. Even if you had a situation where there was no government fiscal deficit at all. That's the amount of the government fiscal deficit isn't really relevant beyond, confidence in the currency. What matters is just the total amount of credit being created. So, yeah, it's a really weird system, but ultimately it's all based on there being gold. There being the fact that you can exchange it for gold, and that's at least where it started, right? The U.S. was officially on the gold standard until 1971. You could, not an individual, but countries could exchange their dollars for gold until Nixon went off. But all this is really important because it's like basically when you don't have control, you don't have like control of the money, you're going to see like price problems like this. And yeah, neither party has any answer for it. So like and that's another thing Republicans will say is, okay, we'll get rid of the immigrants, and then that takes care of inflationary pressure. It's like it reduces it, sure, but it doesn't solve it. So, You know, unfortunately, unfortunately, there are no easy answers, and so I don't know. I mean, I think that things will hold together for the remainder of Trump's term. Maybe not. I don't know. But I think they will. But whoever comes next, whether it be Vance or maybe the Democrats win, I don't know. Whoever comes next, I 28. So I mean 28 election 29. I do think it's. I'm not going to say likely because I don't know. Like I have no idea how long it's lasted as long as it has. But you could see, a dollar crisis where and then that means it's a crisis for every other currency too, because all other currencies are based on the dollar. And with like you get to a point where, if you think about it, like okay, like right now, gold's like twice of what it was last year. Well, what happens when gold is 4 times of what it is this year? People realize that people eventually start to catch on that a dollar is not an acceptable store of value, especially if you have consumer price inflation with it, because there is signs that consumer price inflation is going down. So there may be, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some relief even towards the like for this last part of Trump's term, these last 3 years of Trump's term. But ultimately the fundamentals are there. And when gold and silver just keep rising and rising, you get more and more dollars put into that, and people start to lose confidence in gold, and I mean lose confidence in the dollar. And to be honest, if it's just the gold going up, then you can live with that no matter how high gold goes. But if you have gold going up while consumer prices are also going up, like a return to the 1970s, yeah, that goes on long enough, and then it becomes like a vicious cycle. People are just so desperate to not hold on to dollars because they lose their value so fast that it makes the inflation worse, which makes gold even more expensive. And then, it just you get to a point where people don't want the dollar at all. That's like, so if you look at the countries with hyperinflation, like Zimbabwe or Venezuela, they actually really don't have hyperinflation in practice because nobody uses their currencies. Like in Venezuela technically has the highest inflation rate in the world, but in practice it actually has the lowest, or one of the lowest, because you can't use the Venezuelan currency for anything because nobody will take it. So they just use dollars in neighboring countries. Same type of thing with Zimbabwe. So you have what happens though when you can't use dollars, because the dollar itself is the one that people lost confidence in. Well, in that case, you've got to use, you can use Bitcoin like they do in Nigeria, but really you've got to use gold and silver, probably more silver, because it's silver has always been the people's money because it's gold is too valuable. Gold has historically been used for like capital purchases, like if you were going to buy like a ship or something. But like everyday exchange is silver. Rafi Farber, who's a guy he's a weirdo, and I disagree with him on a lot, but he's educated me on a lot of this, his videos. He had pointed out that, during the peak of hyperinflation in Germany, you could buy like what was like a $50,000 house in Berlin, which back then 50,000 was a lot of money, for $100 worth of silver, because people were just so desperate, for currency, because the Reichsmark, or whatever the I think it was the Reichsmark, was so worthless. And then I don't know if it's still the case, but Lebanon, which has been dealing with hyperinflation for a while, there was a time where like to get like a loaf of bread or something cost an American dollar. But now you could get not a loaf of bread, but like, like some like roadside, road like street food that you could sell. It would cost $1, but it got to a point where you could get the same thing you did a year earlier for an American penny, because the Lebanese currency had become so worthless that people would take real money, a US dollar, a US thing, at knockdown prices. But when the U.S. when that situation comes to the U.S., and it will eventually, I just don't know when. Then, well, that means first of all, you can forget about the U.S. can't have all those overseas bases anymore, because the money won't be there. The U.S. can't just send unlimited amounts of money to Ukraine to keep them in the fight anymore, and neither can the Western European countries, because they won't have the money. And then the sanctions regime that the U.S. does, the U.S. is able to like sanction like countries like Iran and North Korea and Russia because it has the dollar, and it's able to shut people out from it. Well, that doesn't work if nobody wants dollars anymore. So you end up the U.S. would still be the world's most powerful country. I mean, unless, internal divisions just make it completely impotent internationally. But, you're talking about a much more multipolar and much more dangerous world. So, I mean, Trump's term has been more successful than I expected, much more. But the problems that made me so unenthusiastic about voting for Trump are still there, and you're seeing it bear out now. I mean, again, I think there's a pretty good chance we're going to see some relief in these next 2 years, next 2 or 3 years. But ultimately, the structural problems are still there, and nobody's got a way of how to deal with them. So, you're going to get more Mamdanis in the interim. Sorry for the ramble. It's all for now. See you in the next.